Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this ECOG webinar. My name is Emma Boyland. I'm a member of the ECOG Board of Directors. I'm also Appetite and Obesity Research Group Lead at the University of Liverpool in the UK, and I'm an experimental psychologist primarily with an interest in childhood obesity. So thank you very much for joining us today. Some of you might be aware that we hope to have held our 30th anniversary meeting in Budapest in November, but of course COVID put pay to that. So instead we're really pleased to be able to offer these the series of webinars. So we've held two excellent sessions so far. The first one in collaboration with the World Health Organization and the wonderful COSY programme. And the most recent one on adherence to treatment in obesity. And I'm sure our session today will maintain those high standards that have been set. So today we're focusing on the role of fruit and vegetables in childhood obesity prevention. And the motto for ECOG is translating research into daily practice. So I'm hoping that from today you'll not only get a feeling that you're up to date with the most recent research in this area, but also that you feel there's something you can take away from the presentations that you'll be able to build into your daily practice as we all strive to turn the tide on rising rates of childhood obesity. So just some practical information really before we start. The webinar will be recorded and that will be made available along with the slides on the ECOG website. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation and also at the end of the session. So please use the Q&A tool for this rather than the chat function. So please, as you think of questions during presentations, please do write them down using that Q&A tool. And where possible, please mention who the question is directed at so that we can better ensure that we can get that answered by the relevant person. I will refer you to our brilliant speakers today. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome our European friends and colleagues. So Samantha Caton from the University of Sheffield, UK, Brigitte Naderer from the University of Munich, Frans Folkvord from Tilburg University, and Amelia from Teesside University here in the UK as well. I will move on to just the agenda here. So each presentation will be approximately 20 minutes. And as mentioned, there'll be time for some questions at the end of each, as well as at the end of the full session. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to our first speaker, Sam Caton, so she can talk us through promoting vegetable intake in preschool children. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Emma. Let's just see if I can share my screen again now.
Well, I'll have to stop sharing, I think, won't I, so that you can start yours. There we go.
Two. Can you just confirm, Emma, that I'm actually sharing the right screen with you here?
Perfect, yes, thanks.
Lovely, thanks ever so much. So thanks for inviting me along today to speak about some of the work that myself and other people that I've worked with. All this work's not my own, and I have to acknowledge this to begin with. It's many different people that I've worked with along the last few years. So I'm going to focus today on promoting vegetable intake in preschool children. I've called it barriers and potential solutions. I've not covered every barrier and every potential solution, but just to raise awareness of the types of things that we're facing. So I'm going to start off today by asking a question. And I think Melena's going to pose this poll. So how many portions of fruits and vegetables do you usually consume in every day? So we've got 0 to 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 5, oh well, 5 or more. Ah, wonderful. So we've got around 43% of you that are consuming 5 or more, 20% 0 to 2. Excellent. So we'll come back to this at the end of the talk. Right, so I'll close that down. So moving on, so what's so special about vegetables? So today's talk's focusing on fruits and vegetables. A lot of my work over the last 10 years, I think it is, has focused more on vegetables and vegetable intake in preschool children. Why do we focus on vegetables? Well, fruit's not so much of a concern in getting children to eat it because of its sweet taste. And again, I'll come back to that. So the question that people often ask me when they find out what sort of work I do is what's so special about vegetables? Well, they're low in energy density, so they've got fewer kilocalories per gram compared to lots of other foods. They're nutrient dense, so vegetables contain a complex mixture of phytochemicals such as carotenoids, flavonoids. They contain fibre and vitamins. And actually, when you look at a lot of the research where the aim is to isolate these phytochemicals and look at the health benefits of these, you know, when it's put it in a tablet form, for example, the effects are not as good as when vegetables are incorporated into the whole diet. So there's something quite unique about consuming vegetables within the habitual diet. So from this, you know, vegetables are a vegetable-rich diet, a fruit and vegetable-rich diet confers significant health benefits. And these include, of course, today, obesity and overweight, and then comorbidities associated with overweight and obesity, such as diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke, certain cancers. And indeed, there's evidence out there to suggest that diets rich in fruits and vegetables, you know, related to all-cause mortality. We know that diets that are rich in fruits and vegetables as well may have significant impact upon people's mental health and indeed cognitive performance. So there's lots and lots of benefits of having a diet that's rich in plant-based foods or a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables. We know that there's a significant impact on human health and planetary health. We're learning more nowadays about how the two are interlinked. But this is only if we can get people to eat them. So it's all good and well giving the advice that we need to shift more towards plant-based foods and incorporate more fruits and vegetables in our diet. But there's a problem with this. And the problem is actually getting people to consume them. So the problem, so current UK guidelines and many European guidelines that we should be consuming 5 a day. So 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. For an adult, 1 portion is 80 grams. For a child, it's around 40 grams. And certainly data from the UK and indeed across Europe, we know that adults and children are not consuming sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables. And by sufficient, I mean that is to gain the maximum health benefits from consuming 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. We know that a lot of children don't consume the recommended 5 a day. In fact, on average, children are consuming around maximum 3 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. And there's still a significant proportion of children actually that are not consuming any fruits and vegetables as part of their habitual diet, which, you know, it seems to be it's quite problematic. We know that habitual diets of adults and indeed children, because the two are interlinked, contain too much meat and discretionary items. So these are the foods that don't provide very much nutritional value to the habitual diet. They're often cheaper. Kilocalories per gram. So why don't children eat sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables? Well, one of the main issues that we've identified is actually cost. So the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, which is a rolling survey carried out every year in the United Kingdom, we know that intakes of fruits and vegetables increase with income. Yeah, we know that diets that are nutrient dense actually tend to cost more than diets that are less nutrient dense, which is, you know, it poses a problem in itself, really, the cost of the diets that are often recommended, so including 5 a day. So for example, if we think about the social gradients of health that we see again in the UK and across Europe, those people who are less affluent, more deprived communities show an increase in incidence and prevalence of diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, prevalence of overweight and obesity. So it kind of doesn't make sense that those individuals that probably need dietary modification most are those that are left behind and, you know, struggle to afford good nutrient-dense diets. Children don't eat sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables because of availability. And this may be due to lack of accessibility, due to the cost. It may be due to things such as waste. I mean, one of the things that we're driving in terms of planetary health is to reduce food waste. So often schools won't serve fruits and vegetables, or nurseries won't serve fruits and vegetables to children in the amounts that are required, is because there's an excess waste associated with that. Children prefer to eat other foods. And related to this is that there is an abundance of alternative foods, these discretionary items that are high in energy density, low in nutrients, and quite often taste, you know, really, really quite good. You know, sometimes on the occasion, if given the opportunity between eating chocolate as a snack and carrot as a snack, you know, I'd probably choose a piece of chocolate sometimes because, you know, these are feel-good foods and they taste nice. A lot of children report not liking vegetables as well, and this might be due to the texture. They're often fibrous, you know, they can be quite difficult to eat for some children, especially if they're raw. The appearance, you know, they look odd, especially compared to something that's brightly packaged, that's been marketed really very well. And related to the unique property that I mentioned earlier of energy density, so they're low in energy density. And there is an idea that children, or very young children, don't like vegetables or don't consume sufficient amount of vegetables is because they don't provide sufficient amounts of energy required to support this rapid growth trajectory. And then last of all, and the thing that I'm going to focus on today is taste. So a lot of children report that they don't like the taste of vegetables. And actually, when given the choice between vegetables and high energy dense foods, children will always opt for the latter. So we're going to focus on taste here. So this is probably an image that's familiar to many of you out there that's taken care of a small child and given them a food that they don't like, or you think that they don't like. And I'm interested in taste because, you know, taste preferences predict the foods that we like, we consume the foods that we like, and ultimately this has got a relationship to health. Yeah, so there is a direct relationship between taste preference and health. So if we have a look at some of the earlier work on taste preference, so this is the work of Steiner back in 1977, and they looked at facial responses to different tastes in newborn children, in newborn babies, should I say. And what they did is that they got the babies into the laboratory and they dropped different solutions into the baby's mouth. So we've got the rest, the control condition, water here, sweet taste, sour taste, and bitter taste. And what we can see is in response to the sweet taste, babies are looking quite happy, very, very content. We've got the sucking of the lips. You know, I think we can agree that babies enjoying on this sweet taste. Then if we move on to the sour taste, we can see here we've got the pursing of the lips, yeah, that we often see. I'm guessing that there's a lot of you out there that have had small children or engaged with small children and got them to taste a lemon. I've certainly done it with my daughter on the odd occasion when she was very little to see the facial reactions. Not that I'm recommending you go off and do this. And then last of all, we've got the bitter taste in here. So we see the gaping of the mouth. We've got the tongue protrusion, which also blocks the throat as well. So it stopped the ingestion of the bitter taste, which can signify a noxious food that might actually be harmful to health. So you see from this work that there are common facial expressions across different children in responses to different tastes. And this led the group to think, actually, well, you know, do we have this innate liking for sweet tastes? And we know that that it's innate because we see it across different non-primate animals as well. So we can see here we've got the gape to bitter taste in orangutans and different monkeys. We've got the rhesus monkey there, and then almost the smile to the sweet taste, and again we see it in the orangutan and chimpanzee. So we conclude that we do have an innate liking for sweet tastes. We know that infants demonstrate hedonic responses to sweets and aversive reactions to bitter, sour, and salty to lesser extent tastes. We also know that when given the option, infants will ingest more sweet tastes. It's often used as with analgesic properties before children were given certain tests or injections in some countries. And so this leads us to believe and to understand that actually infants, whilst they've got this innate liking for a sweet taste, they then need to learn to like non-sweet tastes. And we've got another example here from Gancho back in 1983. So we can really see that we're seeing these universal facial reactions in different infants. So we need to learn to like non-sweet tastes, but how do we learn to like? You know, learning to like could be a lifelong process. I'm sure that all of you can think of occasions where in adulthood you've learned to like different tastes, maybe such as coffee, alcoholic drinks, you know, beer, wines. Okay, they've got pharmacological properties associated with it, but learning to like is indeed a lifelong process. But there is lots and lots of influences in early life where infants learn to like tastes. So with this, we'll move on to what I'm going to refer to here as old wives' tales and strange smelling newborns. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence out there about infants being born smelling peculiar. There's lots of anecdotal evidence out there, and I'm sure that you've all engaged with this at some point in conversations with people where babies are reported to actually really like the foods that the mothers consumed during pregnancy, or they're actually very averse to them. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence out there, and actually there's something in this. And as scientists, we tend to dismiss this anecdotal evidence, but actually some of it holds truth within there. And some of the earliest evidence of this that I've been able to locate is this short communication here from Hauser back in 1985. And it's 4 case studies from an Israeli hospital where 4 newborn babies were born with very distinct odours. Now, this brought the attention to the clinicians because it actually can signify that there's an infection there and that they need to act on the child and indeed the mother quite fast. But what they found upon further investigation is that the babies smelled very strongly of the last meal consumed by the mother. So this contributes in utero exposure in terms of taste preference learning. So we know that the amniotic fluid is continually refreshed and may contain flavour compounds from the maternal diet. We also know that there's flavour transmission in breast milk as well. So this represents chemical continuity, that the maternal diet influences in utero exposure, and then once the baby's born, there's some evidence of flavour transmission in breast milk as well. So we've not actually done any work on in utero exposure or flavour transmission in breast milk. We started this work with looking at the weaning period or the complementary feeding period. So this is a really important time in a child's life in terms of taste preference development, particularly with reference to vegetables. So it's a time period, a sensitive time period, whereby we can maximise the food repertoire and what food children are exposed to and what they learn to like. So one of the first studies we did on this was looking at the use of vegetables in the weaning period. You know, we asked how mothers introduced them, whether they were a single vegetable or in combinations. We also did some qualitative work in this, and we asked mothers, you know, how do you learn your children to like vegetables? And we also asked about the siblings as well, which were often preschool children. And 2 main things came out of this, is that the mothers use vegetables by stealth. So they told us that, well, actually, if my child doesn't like vegetables, I just hide them, which is good because, you know, the children are still getting the nutrients associated with vegetables. The caregivers are reassured that they're providing a healthful diet to their child. What we don't know is the impact of having vegetables hidden in food on later liking and intake. And then another thing that came out of this work is that, you know, mothers reported, they said, well, actually, I just keep offering them. If they don't eat them in one meal, you know, I'll wait a few days and I'll offer the vegetable again. And this, you know, was quite enlightening to us because, you know, this is repeated exposure. So this is one of the potential solutions that we can recommend to parents and caregivers, which is quite effective. So repeated exposure. So just briefly, it could, we know the effectiveness could be grounded in the mere exposure effects, and this was first reported by Zients back in 1968. So this is the more we encounter a stimulus, the more we become familiar with it and we learn to like it that way. Or it could be the learned safety hypothesis proposed by Rosin and Calat in 71. And this basically suggests that novel foods have got the potential to be noxious and to be damaging to one's health. And actually we learn by experience with a food that a food's safe to consume and we go off and consume it. We know from the early work done by Leanne Birch that often 10 to 15 exposures are required for a child to actually learn to like a food. Again, using my daughter as a guinea pig over the years, when she was very little, we used to chat how often, you know, we'd offered apple to her, raw apple. It actually was 21 exposures. Again, you know, so it can take quite a lot of exposures, but the gold standard is around 10 to 15 exposures. And this is what protocols tend to look like. So the bottom here is carrots. This is just repeated exposure to one vegetable. You can combine this with low variety of different vegetables and high variety. And a lot of this work is work similar to what Andrea Meyer's done. So she's done a lot of work on combining repeated exposure and looking at different levels of variety as well. So we've done a few experiments looking at repeated exposure using familiar and non-familiar vegetables, and we compared it to other learning mechanisms such as flavour-nutrient learning and flavour-flavor learning. So flavour-nutrient learning is where you pair the target vegetable with some energy, so you increase the energy density of it. Flavour-flavor learning is where you pair the vegetable with a liked and familiar flavour. And actually what we found is really quite nice, is that you don't have to do anything to the vegetables. You don't have to add anything to them. You just have to repeatedly expose the child to them, which is a really nice, simple public health message to be able to convey. So we found that repeated exposure was consistently effective at increasing food intake, vegetable intake in children. We found that not all children respond the same. So the younger children that are less fussy are more accepting of vegetables, particularly novel vegetables. Older children become a little bit more fussy and less accepting. However, repeated exposure is still very, very successful in these children. We've tried repeated exposure with variety as well. So building on the work of Andrea Meyer, we paired repeated exposure with variety. Now, why is variety important? We know that when we have a diet that's got lots of different foods in it, so if you think about when you maybe go to somebody's house and they put on a buffet with lots of different foods, this promotes food intake. And what did we find here? We found again, repeated exposure is really highly successful. The effects of variety was mixed. And I say that it was mixed because sometimes when we paired a liked vegetable with a novel vegetable, the children didn't like this. Because, you know, if the carrot was touching a radish, they liked the carrot, but they didn't like the radish, or they'd never had radish before. You know, you see these contamination effects. So the effects of variety is often mixed. We've carried out a feasibility and acceptability study in Sheffield, where we got parents to swap high energy dense snacks for fruits and vegetables, or we asked them to just give half the usual amounts of these high energy dense snacks. Both interventions were very acceptable and easy to deliver and successful to deliver, But we found that when we got parents to swap these high energy dense commercially available snacks for fruits and vegetables, that vegetable intake was increased. And this didn't displace any of the vegetables that formed part of the meal, which is, you know, quite a nice thing to do, because you would expect that if you're giving vegetables as snacks, that maybe children would eat less vegetables within the meals, but actually this didn't happen, which was quite a nice finding. And again, there are many other evidence-based vegetables of getting evidence-based way of getting children to eat more vegetables. Tangible rewards are good for children to initially try the vegetable, offering choice or varying preparation methods, like increasing portion sizes, eating as a family, gardening and education. And there's some lovely interventions, such as getting children to read books, such as Dr. Chandni Nekitsing from the University of Leeds has done some nice work on this, Carmel Houston Price. And there are also wider food environment solutions. So there are lots of different ways to promote vegetable intake in preschool children. We've learned that simple repeated exposure is very effective, that we ideally need to get people to introduce vegetables early when children are young. We need to engage with the wider food system and build public health interventions, you know, that look at food, learning in education context. We need to look at price, we need to look at advertising, you know, the way that people process information regarding fruits and vegetables, which I believe we'll be hearing more about today. There's much more research on promotion of vegetable intake in lower income populations that we're to do. And I've put here that we need to address the issue of waste. So whilst repeated exposure is incredibly effective, there is lots of waste associated with this. And this is something that I believe that we really do need to address. We need to address the problem on a global scale. It's not just in Europe that we see children not eating sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables. You can look at China, India, Africa. The problem's global. We also need to seek to improve adults' diets, which very, very quickly, because I'm running over time now, you know, we've got 50% of the audience that we're eating 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, which is wonderful, and well done to all of you that are doing this. But we've still got 50% of the audience today, and many probably more in the general population. And, you know, we can't expect children's diets to improve unless we improve adults' diets, because they're the gatekeepers of food. They're the one that make the purchasing decisions. You know, we need to make healthful diets more accessible to all, not just a certain proportion of the population. Very, very quickly, I'd like to acknowledge all the wonderful female researchers that I've worked with over the years on the data and the studies that I've shown today. And thank you for listening. I'm very happy to answer any questions, and apologies for running over by 2 or 3 minutes.
Thanks ever so much, Sam. I'll just take Chair's prerogative and jump in with a question quickly before I go to the Q&A tool. You mentioned the need to kind of adapt this or address this on a global scale before. Have you applied any of your techniques to, you know, start to address this global problem?
Yeah. So we're working on a BBSRC funded project now in China. And this is really quite exciting. So we're applying some of the learning principles of repeated exposure, not only to increasing the intake of biofortified vegetables in rural China. We're working with Harvest Plus. We're also applying the principles of repeated exposure and learning to like in getting children and families to administer micronutrient supplementation as well. So there's a product called Yin Yang Bao that's offered to all babies in China. And there's quite a low uptake of this because babies show those facial reactions that they don't like this product, and therefore parents make a very quick assumption that the baby doesn't like it. So we're just, I think it starts in March, using repeated exposure to increase liking of micronutrient supplements as well as biofortified veg.
Excellent. Look forward to seeing what you get up to there. And we do have one question on the Q&A tool. It's asking about vegetable broth and if you absorb enough phytochemicals and vitamins if you were to drink something like vegetable broth. Is that a good way for both adults and children to increase their healthy intake?
Gosh, I have to admit here that that's a little bit out of my domain, actually. I'm wondering if Amelia, who's online as well, might be able to answer this as a nutritionist. Vegetable broth. So I suppose if the vegetables are boiled there and you're consuming the whole vegetable, so you've got all the phytochemicals and the nutrients and the fibre in there, then that's going to be beneficial. I have to admit, I'm absolutely not aware of what happens to the phytochemicals when they're raised above a particular temperature, whether this degrades somewhat and bioavailability is low. Amelia, do you know anything more about this?
It's not my area of expertise, but I would agree really, Sam, with what you've said. I think we can go into this in very great detail. There's even evidence that cutting a carrot affects its bioavailability. So we have to think about this within the realms of practicality. And I think, you know, to have a veg broth is a good thing, but I think you lose a lot of the benefits that you get. There's a lot to be said from eating a piece of fruit whole compared with fruit juice. So if we think about it in a similar method, so not saying it's unhealthy, but there are lots of benefits to eating the whole product.
Thank you very much. And do you think fresh produced food works better than ready-made food at weaning? I know there are a lot of kind of very well packaged baby weaning foods that sort of, you know, talk about having your 5 a day in them, or talk about how much fruit and veg is packed in there and all the vitamins and stuff. Do you think parents should be wary of what's in those and try to stick to home produced food where possible?
This is a difficult one, Emma. I think commercial baby food has its place. It's safe, it's all baby grade, it's accessible to people. You know, again, we have to put our public health hats on here as well as our psychologist and nutritionist hats. You know, some people don't have facilities to cook these foods, you know, and so these foods absolutely provide a safe way of feeding babies. My only gripe with industry is that the combinations that are offered. It would be really, really nice to see single vegetable purees so babies can learn, you know, the taste of a pure vegetable, rather than have, you know, a sweet potato that's got a load of apple puree and hidden sugars added to it. So, you know, that they have their place, they're safe, they're accessible. It would be nice if industry would take on board an evidence-based approach and have single vegetables that babies can actually learn to like. I understand why they don't do it, because, you know, the consumers probably wouldn't buy this. There'd be a lot of waste. So, you know, everything is a fine balance. As Amelia's just said, you know, you've got to balance up what's practical, you know, what's useful, and the same applies to baby food.
I certainly did a lot more producing my own weaning food with my first child than I did with my second, which I think is probably a common situation.
You know, we always advise that home cook's best, and you know, maybe it is, but it's not best if you don't have the facilities or you don't have anywhere to store the vegetables. You know, as Amelia said as well, as soon as you cut that carrot, the nutrients may start to degrade. You know, if you don't have, you know, adequate storage, then again, you know, commercially produced food might be a better alternative.
And a couple more questions coming on the Q&A tools. We'll have to do them quite quickly, I think, just mindful of time. But one is asking about if children only like a sort of set couple or few vegetables and they eat those same ones repeatedly, is that still going to confer, you know, a decent amount of health benefit?
I think that if children are eating a limited amount of vegetables, that's good. They are eating vegetables, they're getting the nutrients and the fibre and everything associated with them. And I think that the advice that we could give on a population level, of course, we're not giving individual advice today, is that, you know, if you've got the means to introduce new vegetables, you know, try to do it in small amounts. You know, babies don't take a lot to learn to like, you know. Keep offering the vegetables that you perceive babies don't like. I mean, there's a whole lot of research out there about how quickly parents and caregivers make a decision that babies don't like a particular taste, when actually it's just the texture in the mouth, the processing in the mouth. So, you know, good if they're eating them. If you're able, then keep trying, keep persisting. You know, my daughter, again, I'll come back to the apple. We used to chart it, quite sadly, on the kitchen notice board. It was 21 times we had to give her apple before she'd actually eat it. And I remind her of it to this day at age 12. But yeah, keep trying if you can.
Wonderful, thank you. Just any thoughts you have on the pouches of fruit that are available to parents, and also this the idea of baby-led weaning. Any quick thoughts on either of those?
Baby-led weaning's got a lot of advantages in terms of satiety and satiation cues in babies, and responsive feeding, so learning when baby's full and when they're not full. Again, on the other side of it, again, there are disadvantages to it, such as the micronutrient and macronutrient composition of the foods offered. Baby-led weaning is only successful if the adults are consuming a nutritionally adequate diet. You know, and let's not forget that there's a difference between what babies need and what adults need. So you run the risk of it being too high in protein. You know, you run the risk of it being too high in salt. And again, we need to, you know, you need to think about what you're eating as an adult as well, and whether or not it's appropriate. Again, advantages and disadvantages. And again, I don't think we should be judgmental about anybody that wants to do baby-led weaning or the traditional puree way. Both methods have been successful and led to very healthy babies for umpteen years. Regarding the pouches, again, they have their place. They're useful when you're out and about. You know, are you feeding them off? You know, they're useful in terms of, you know, quick meals, so on and so forth. I don't actually want to demonize any of these foods. You know, they all have their place. You know, the only concern that you'll probably have is if you're giving babies the whole pouch to suck, and maybe that stimulates overconsumption. You don't see these fullness cues that you're seeing from babies, you know, if they're older and they're sucking this pouch. But you know, overall, I think if it works and the child's healthy, and you know, you've got a level of confidence that you're providing a nutritionally adequate diet, then, you know, I don't want to say anything against these products, because, you know, some people have to use them and some people choose to use them, and that's fine.
Thanks ever so much, Sam. Just in the interest of time, I think we'll have to move on. We may be able to come back to some of the other questions and issues at the end of the session, but I'm really pleased now to be able to introduce Dr. Brigitte Naderer from the University of Munich, who's going to talk to us about conscious message processing in fruit intake in children.
Thank you so much. Hello, thank you for the possibility to talk to you today. I'm talking today about how to make fruit more desirable for children. We've already heard that making fruit more desirable to children might be a much easier endeavor than with vegetables. Still, we see there are health benefits connected to eating more fruit than, for instance, candy as a snack, and that eating enough fruit and vegetables has high health benefits regarding the development of childhood obesity, and thus we focus on this in our research. The research I will present today is also not research I've conducted on my own, but in a bigger team. And yeah, I will focus mostly on media presentations of food. And this is because there is an abundant research that presents that media presentations can affect food preferences of children. So they steer kind of what children desire and what they even like to eat, and how much they eat of certain things. And thus I will essentially talk about how food is presented in entertaining media, and how maybe fruit and vegetables could be presented in this context to make it more desirable for children, kind of an edutainment approach in that sense. And to kick it off, I want to start out by sharing with you a very oversimplified depiction of the classic food pyramid, with levels of highly recommended and not very recommended foods to eat frequently. And I want to start out with short questions to you, the participants, on what do you think food depictions in content targeted at children is most commonly shown. And here I want to know what percentage of foods shown in children's movies depict fast food, candy, and soft drinks. The results I will present to you in a minute are based on a content analysis I've conducted with colleagues on 250 children's movies. Those are the 10 most popular children's movies of the time frame between 1991 and 2015. The most popular children's movies in Germany, but they of course also include a lot of international classics that you are going to be familiar with. So I'm guessing the results are in. I unfortunately can't see them. Oh, here we go. Okay, so most of you even overestimated the percentage of unhealthy foods depicted in children's movies. So fast food, candy, and soft drinks make about 41.4% of all food depictions, while those foods that are most recommended to eat, so fruit, vegetables, and to drink water, only make 25.9% of all food depictions. Another question I've prepared for you today is with regard to the most frequent beverage that is presented in these children's movies. And I want to know what do you think is the most frequently shown type of drink? And the answer questions are alcohol, soft drinks, water, or hot beverages like cocoa, tea, and coffee. So unsurprisingly, most of you thought it was going to be soft drinks, but the result also was very, very surprising to us. Actually, the most frequent drink presented in children's movies are alcoholic beverages. So 30% of all beverage depictions show alcoholic drinks, and 3/4 of all analyzed movies showed at least one depiction of alcohol in the movies. And this was rather surprising to us, and we are right now working on a replication of this content analysis with more recent movies and more recent TV series. And the data that we collected there actually replicates the percentages of food depictions that I showed to you, and also again replicates the results on alcohol being a very, very frequent occurring drink option in content targeted at children. This is not something I'm going to focus on today, but anyways, I thought it is a very interesting result that also tells us something about observational learning and connection of what food is appropriate and plays a very important role in our societies. So we know a bit now more about the frequencies of food and how they are showed to children, but it also plays a role how foods are presented to kids in these movies. And actually what we can see is that if food is presented in children's movies, fast food, desserts, soft drinks, they elicit a high level of enthusiasm in those movies. So they play a key role there. They are consumed, and characters that consume these foods usually like them a lot and also say so in this content. The same can't be said for fruits and vegetables. Here the evaluations are quite different, if those products are even consumed, because in many cases we see that fruits and vegetables actually have kind of a decorative element to them. So we coded a lot of fruit bowls and fridges stocked with fresh vegetables. But when it comes to what is actually eaten, this is typically products that are low in nutritional value and high in fat, salt, or sugar. So this is the food environment that children are confronted with in media content. And this plays a role on how food preferences are developed. And we built this on the theoretical model of one of our speakers that will speak later today, where we consider that food presentations in media elicit a certain cue reactivity, which indicates a level of activation towards food presentations. This could be measured, for instance, through higher or lower heart rates, eye tracking in the sense of visual attention, or explicit memory measures of recalling the food presentations. And this cue reactivity then can translate into eating behavior, for instance, choosing fruit over a candy product, or how much you eat of certain products. Of course, this is not just a stimulus response model where we think that every food presentations lead to a certain eating behavior, but individual susceptibility factors matter a lot. So the children's age, the children's level of BMI, and the children's level of food neophobia, but also context factors. So how families talk about nutrition, what kind of parental rules there are about media consumption and certain snacks. We have focused in our research very much on the processing part of how fruit versus candy depictions in media content are processed by children. And I first want to highlight an eye tracking study that we have conducted. And with an eye tracking study, you have the possibility to measure visual attention. And here we really focused on the visual attention of food products inserted in a cartoon. So what we did in the study is we developed or produced our own cartoon where the story was always the same. So the storyline was kept similar or exactly the same in each condition. The only thing we varied was what kind of products the characters interacted with in these movies. And we made a fruit condition where they only interacted with fruit products, a candy condition where all products were candies or desserts, and a control condition where they showed products were non-edible and thus neutral objects. And we really took care to make the chosen options as comparable as possible with regards to size, color, and shape, because all of these factors, of course, impact whether you focus on it or not. And we really wanted to make the differences only being led back to what kind of product category children are confronted with in the cartoons. And what we found regarding the visual attention is that candy products elicited the highest level of attention, significantly more so than fruit products, and both edible products elicited higher levels of visual attention compared to non-edible products. So what we can deduce from this first result is that food really works as an eye catcher. So if there's food inserted in a narrative context, children focus their visual attention on these products, and they will do even more so if those products show candy. And the same or similar results then we found also for the explicit memory for those products, in the way that candy is much more memorable, and children could list the candy products they had seen in the movie much more easily than they could do for fruit or non-edible objects. So what we have learned is that the processing of fruit and of candy products seems to be very, very different in children. And we also, and this is why we think that just presenting fruit or candy options to children in movies might not elicit the same kind of reactions. And thus we followed again the same procedure, and we again produced a cartoon by ourselves. This time we made a short story about a panda, and this panda either ate nothing at all throughout the movie, or he ate mandarins, or he ate fruit gums. So so candy throughout the movie. And we then gave children the option to choose between fruit and candy. And what we found is that in the control condition, actually fruit gums and candy, the fruit and the candy were similarly attractive to children, with 50-50% of what children chose. So this also showcases that fruit is a very attractive option to children if they are not prompted otherwise. But if they saw one of the movies that has had a food in them, actually the candy option was much more attractive for children, and in both children significantly more often chose candy. This then led us to the assumption that we would need more persuasive strategies that need to be connected to fruit presentations in a media content. And we therefore developed this typology of persuasive strategies that could be connected to fruit presentations. Some of them I've already kind of mentioned or touched upon when I presented you the results of the content analysis. For instance, the three pillars here are source, composition, and information. And composition is something I've already mentioned with regards to that more interactive and more central placements, of course, elicit more attention and thus might be more effective in eliciting any change in behavior of children. Also, information that is connected to those presentations, and I've also already touched upon this in the content analysis with regard to evaluations of those foods in media content. So if characters in the movies then highlight the taste or mention other positive aspects about this food that they are consuming in the movie, this might affect children's choices and preferences. And lastly, it also matters in our view who the source of this information is. So whether this, for instance, in a children's movie would be the villain or the hero of the movie, if this is a character that could be seen as a peer to children, or an expert that gives recommendations about the food. We therefore conducted another line of studies where we tried to include all those different persuasive strategies, and we followed similar procedures as you have seen already. So we produced cartoons again, and just connected different persuasive strategies to the fruit presentations. For instance, we looked into affective and cognitive arguments that are connected to fruit presentations, gain and loss arguments. This is something that is very well researched in health communication. Gain arguments would be connected to what you gain when you do a certain action, whereas loss arguments would highlight the downsides of not doing something. Then we also looked into majority and minority presentations. This means we looked into characters and whether just one character in the movie eats fruit, or if a whole group of peers would do would do so. And lastly, we also looked into the role of different endorsers, and we found positive effects on the attractiveness of fruit in different to choosing candy. So choosing fruit over candy was what we always looked at as our dependent variable. However, it always was necessary that children were able to really recall the arguments and presented arguments that we showed them in our cartoons. And this is something that is very highly dependent also on children's age. So we always found children's age to be a very relevant factor here. Again, we are talking about narrative context here. So children are focusing already on the story that is told in the cartoon or the movie. And for them to then on top of that also focus on arguments about eating fruit is something that is not very easy to handle, and there needs to be a certain cognitive development for children to be able to do so. Still, we see that, or we would deduce that narrative and entertaining media content can potentially be helpful to educate children about healthy foods, and thus elicit the choice of fruit over candy in choice situations. And we would really recommend content creators to question whether all food presentations need to be in first line fast foods, soft drinks and candy, or if those could not be swapped out by some other presentations as well, just to also to keep the frequency up of those presentations. And we would also like to stress the edutainment potential of those contents. Indeed, with the content analysis we now conducted, we found some very nice examples of recent TV series that take this edutainment approach, and for instance highlight in a storyline the advantages of gardening, and then eating this self-produced fruit and the taste of this fruit, and just the environmental aspects of it as well. And if we come to very explicit recommendations on the content side of showcasing fruit, we would argue that it matters what arguments, how and who delivers this message to really increase the attractiveness of fruit. And here, interactive and prominent food presentations work the best. In addition, positive and likable characters that are perceived as experts are important to really deliver those arguments, and gain-oriented and effective arguments that stress the good taste, the sweet taste, even though we've already heard that this is not enough, but the sweet taste of fruit and the positive aspects connected to eating fruit would be very helpful, and would be a very helpful approach in presenting those in narrative content targeted at children. That was my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you ever so much. You've certainly been productive the last couple of years. It's an excellent body of work. And just while I wait for some perhaps some questions to come through on our Q&A tool, if I could just jump in, and of course you and I have crossed paths a few times, and I've done work on food marketing that has crossed over with some of your work. And do you feel that there, perhaps as food advertising and marketing restrictions become more kind of robust, do you think that you might see some spillover of those cues moving into programming instead of the advertising between programs? And do you think that that's something we need to watch out for and perhaps address with regulation as well?
Yes, I really think so. I mean, we've done a lot of research on embedded food marketing as well. So product placements, where you already see this spillover of embedded brands in content targeted at children. And the problem there is that brands, that there is not a lot of branded healthy food. So you don't have a lot of vegetable and fruit brands that could be integrated in those movies. So here we already see that soft drinks, fast food, snacks are very, very high on the list, with McDonald's and Coca-Cola being one of the highest sponsors that are shown in those kind of movies. And now we see regulations coming in of those embedded integrations already, but they are only targeted at branded ones. However, I really believe that mostly for the content of a movie and the narrative of the movie, it doesn't really matter what the characters eat. So I would really like to see that there is a bigger variety of food environment in those contents, and that content creators are really aware of their choices there as well.
Thank you. I know you mentioned Alvin and the Chipmunks there as providing some sort of good role modeling for food. We've got a question about, have you found any kind of films that have really put forward a good message about healthy food that could be recommended?
I just can think of the not so good examples right now on the top of my mind. Actually, it's funny with Alvin and the Chipmunks, because they were on the movie side one of the worst examples that we have, because they have a very, very prominent product placement for cheese balls throughout their movie series, where the Chipmunks even produced a whole song about this brand and love to eat it all the time. And we were a bit surprised that for the TV series, they really had this edutainment approach where they showcased important narrative messages about healthy foods. But for the movies, I would have to think about that. I'm sorry, I don't have one right now.
Thanks ever so much. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to Frans' presentation,
Sure.
But hopefully we'll be able to address some more questions to you towards the end of the session. Thanks ever so much. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Frans Folkvord, who's going to talk to us about the healthygenic environment and whether we can do better in promoting fruits and vegetables for child health.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Thank you for having me. And my name is Frans Folkvord. I'm working at the Tilburg School of Humanities and Digital Sciences, where I work as an assistant professor. And in addition, I work for Open Evidence, which is a research company working in Barcelona and Milan, where we conduct policy research for the European Commission mostly. And I will talk about the healthygenic environment. And as you can see also in the slide, there are 5 zones actually, or places in the world considered as blue zones. Maybe some of you already heard of this. It's quite a popular and also very interesting concept, because apparently there are 5 places worldwide where people live healthily and also live very long. And also apparently, based on the surveys, they also live very happily there. So actually this is close to paradise, as you would suggest. And if you have, unfortunately, I haven't visited these places, but if you look at the images online of these places, they seem beautiful. So I think it's also in that context, it's considered a paradise. But more interesting is how, and there were some great research being conducted that has examined why these people live so healthy and which factors might explain why they live so long and also so healthily, and what kind of factors do influence this. For example, food. So one of the things I will focus on this, especially because if you ask people what would you like to become, or what kind of life would you like to live, most people respond that they will be living a healthy, long life and enjoy this life while doing it. But unfortunately, this is the real situation. The majority of people across the world are overweight, as most of you probably will know. And also, which is much more problematic, is that the majority of children are becoming overweight globally. Even if you look at the trend in these blue zones, it is going the wrong way. So even there, we see that the children who live in a more industrialized food environment, they find it very difficult to live these healthy lives. So even in these blue zones, and now they have distinguished 5, we see that the next generation is facing great difficulties with their lifestyle actually. And then there is, I want to have one question that I want to ask you about the reasons for this. So one of the factors that we already have seen in the previous talks is food marketing. I hope that you didn't see the slide already, but what do you think is the ratio of food marketing expenditure for unhealthy versus healthy food marketing? Do you think it's 50-50 or 75-25, or do you think it's 90 versus 10? Or do you think it's 99 versus 1% of the expenditure of food marketing? Okay, most of you already responded, and then we see that most of you think that it's 75-25, so a majority of the food marketing is for unhealthy foods, and only 2%, so 6% of you think it's 99 versus 1. And although there is some discussion, because first of all, you need to define what is unhealthy, what is healthy food marketing. We see that if you look at expenditure, and this is in the US, we see that 99% of the food marketing is for foods that are considered as not very healthy, or something that you should really eat with a limited amount, and that less than 1% is spent on fruits and vegetables. Although several health practitioners, dietitians, they of course recommend to eat more fruit and vegetables, as the previous talks also have elaborated. But then of course the question is, if we see this abundance of unhealthy food marketing, and we also see that people do not consume the foods that they should consume, and that we see that as a consequence of this, people become overweight or obese, and maybe even more problematic, they become chronically sick, what should we then do? Of course, one of the things is that recently has been in the news in the UK, and of course this also elaborated the further discussion in countries like the Netherlands, where I live, to ban food advertising. And now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we also see that not only being overweight or obese is problematic for your health, but also the kinds of food that you consume, because it reinforces the vulnerability for a virus like the COVID-19 virus. And then, of course, one of the questions is, what should we do with the food marketing? And as we have seen, there are different ideas, ban food advertising for different ages, or do something else. And of course, we should also try to focus on, okay, but this will reduce the amount and the impact of unhealthy food marketing. But it does not necessarily mean that we also make the fruit and vegetables more appealing, or that we reinforce the message that these should be consumed. And one of the ideas that is problematic to my understanding is the idea of the Homo economicus. And this is an economic idea, as already Homo economicus suggests. But this suggests, based on the assumptions of scholars, and there are some very famous ones that have also influenced the political field, and they think that people are very rational. They mostly follow their self-interest, and they know exactly what they want and also their priorities. They can judge and make a rational decision when they receive the information that they want. And one of the examples that we have seen the last decade is, for example, the information on the backside of a product. So you have the nutritional information, you know the price. So if you have this information, you should be capable of making a rational decision. And then, of course, these are assumptions made by intellectuals and mostly scientists. But of course, do these assumptions also hold when you test them in reality? And now, the last 3 to 4 decades, we have seen that this is actually not the case. And one of the things in food marketing that we have tested is also based on this idea. And Brigitte just explained this theoretical model. She did it perfectly, so thank you for that. But one thing that I want to emphasize is this curiosity that she was mentioning, because this is subconsciously, because mostly you are not aware of the physiological and psychological responses that you have on the food cues that you see in advertising. So for example, you start thinking about it, okay, that becomes conscious, but you do not necessarily know that this is because of the food cues that you just have seen, especially not when you're, of course, a child. Secondary, you also have these physiological responses, so that you start craving and that your body starts preparing for consuming this advertised foods. And as we have seen before, we see that most of the food cues embedded in advertising are unhealthy. So most probably this will lead to the preparation of your body to consume these unhealthy foods. And this is in line with a recent theoretical model by Daniel Kahneman, where he distinguished between 2 different processes. So first of all, you have the system 1 thinking, and this is a more quick and automatic way of thinking. There's little or no effort, and this is considered to be unconscious. And if you read the scientific literature, especially from psychology or behavioral economics or behavioral science, you see that most of the things that we do, also our food decisions, are very automatic and emotional and subconsciously. And this is also what we try to emphasize in the theoretical model, that most of the food cues that you see in advertising, you process them automatically. They activate physiological responses, and subsequently you start consuming the foods and you have the feeling that you made the decision rational. So this is system 2 thinking. There you consider this more conscious and rational. This is slower, so it takes more time because you have to weigh all the information, you have to weigh the arguments pro and con for a certain decision, and then subsequently you make a decision. But this is also an effortful decision making. So when you're tired or when you're very hungry or when you're following a diet, this is very difficult to do. So therefore, mostly whenever you are in this kind of state, it's very difficult to make a rational decision that is also very complex to make. And this range of literature and also very influential book that Daniel Kahneman has wrote, Thinking Fast and Slow, is actually also quite a funny story, because he's a psychologist and he knew for many decades, because he has read the literature of Freud and Jung, he already knew that the subconscious of people is very influential and is affecting people's day-to-day decision making. But in economy, they had this idea of homo economicus, that people were very rational, they were above the other levels of animals, and they were the ones being held responsible for the decisions. But he showed in several experiments, together with his beloved colleague Tversky, that this was actually not the case, and that you can conduct several interventions to show that people are actually very irrational and that their rationality is bounded. So you should try to improve their capabilities of making healthier choices. So one of the things that we, for example, did for the European Commission to test whether it would be a possibility to inform children about the advertising effect of an advertising did not lead to less consumption of energy-dense snacks in Spain and in the Netherlands, and children even did not really process this information that there was an advertising, and some of the children even consumed more because they thought it was expected from them to eat more if there was an advertising, if there was a sponsorship disclosure in the advertising. So this is all based on classical conditioning, of course, which is a basic principle in psychology, but also in scientific research in general nowadays. And what you see is that something that has, of course, a response, because if a dog or a human being sees food, he starts responding to that. Then subsequently, if you have a tuning fork which does not have anything to do with the food or with the saliva that is produced whenever you see food, if you combine these two, subsequently only this tuning fork can lead to the same response as the food is doing. Of course, this is something that is also implemented in food marketing. They try to induce based on the logo, based on all kinds of things that are emotionally attached to the commercial. They try to combine this to the brand to show and to try to activate this whenever people have to make a decision for a snack or simply for food consumption. And then there is also an example, because this is nice theoretical, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you think, yeah, but how does this work in reality? Because as we have seen, these economists, they are very good in developing theoretical models, but sometimes they forget to test it in reality. And as a psychologist, of course, I want to do that because I'm interested in how it works. And these are my two daughters. And then, of course, she received a cake when she was 5. But there you see at the youngest one, she immediately responded by a physiological activation of wanting the food. So, and of course, she was then 3 days. So she was not aware of that, but she showed this physiological response to what, and this is of course actual food. But there were several studies, as Brigitte also showed, that you can also show the same effects in food cues and advertising. But then maybe you say, yeah, but Frans, this is just one example. As a good researcher, you should try to include more examples. So here is another one. And there again, you see the same response, even when she was 1 year older. You see that there's an automatic reaction towards palatable food, of course, that makes it very difficult not to eat these foods and to inhibit yourself. And also what we do not see for healthier foods, as we have seen in the first presentation today. But as we see, there are several reasons, and one is emphasized quite successful by the Eat Lancet Commission, that we have to eat healthier, not only for ourselves, but also because our planet has its boundaries. So we should try to improve our consumption to save the climate, and also to feed 10 billion of people, and also with a healthy diet, of course. So there are several reasons actually, and these are just a few of them, to eat healthier and to make sure that we save the planet and also save our life. Because there are already some scholars that saying that this generation will live less long than the generation that is currently living, and hopefully will of course live very long. So what we did is we collected all the information, scientific research, together with a colleague of mine, testing the effects of food and vegetable promotion, because as we have seen, the promotion of unhealthy foods is quite successful, as Emma Boyland also has found very often. But now the question is, can we do the same for healthier foods? Banning unhealthy foods does not necessarily mean that people, and especially children, will start consuming healthier foods. So one of the questions is can we use the same mechanism that we have studied and that we have quite good understanding of unhealthy food marketing? Do these processes also work the other way around? So what we want to test, and we are currently doing that in several studies, is to want to test is if we promote this food and vegetables, do we also see these physiological and psychological processes, such as attention, and Brigitte just showed it with the eye tracker. But also, if we make it more attractive, does it also influence the level of rewarding of these kinds of foods? And of course, subsequently, we hope that children start eating these foods, or maybe eat more of these foods, and especially vegetables. And this has a reciprocal relationship to the process, because as we also see in the literature, if children start eating these kinds of foods, they also start feeling them as more rewarding, because they like these foods, they know they are healthy, but it also makes them feel quite good about these foods. And then subsequently, if children start eating these foods, we also hope that this will create a habit formation. So if you eat it every time during the lunch, at a certain moment, it will become a habit, mostly between 7 and 10 times. And then it becomes a habit, and then it is easier. It becomes subconscious. You do not have to think about it all the time. You automatically consume, for example, the blueberries in your muesli during the morning. It's not a question. It's simply automatic activation of this kind of systems. And then, of course, eventually we hope that if this starts happening, if people build these new habits, these healthy habits, this will lead to more and a better health. So better health indicators, both physiological and also psychological, because we also have seen that eating healthier is also better for your mental health. But we also see, and this was also stressed in the previous presentation, is these individual and contextual factors are extremely important, because we mostly see that there are specific target groups that we need to allocate and that we need to find in order to be able to better communicate the messages that we have in order to make sure that they eat healthier, hopefully. And one of the things that this amazing Sir David Attenborough has done is, next to his great series of movies that he made, he just made a new one, and then he also started his Instagram account, and then within 1 day or within 2 days, he even had more than 2 million followers. And I'm not sure if he does it because he really likes Instagram so much, but I think he knows he has to reach the youth, and in order to reach the youth, you do not broadcast television shows, but you have to go on those same platforms as they are doing. And of course, most of the youth are now on Instagram, so he tries to reach them through Instagram. Other examples are these. Of course, the Lidl is very active in this. In the Netherlands, at least, they promote fruit and vegetables with these characters, with these things that children can have whenever they buy these foods. And of course, you see these water bottles with the Smurfs on them, which are very popular among children. Second question is, of course, that this is leading to more plastic, so this is not very good, especially not in the Netherlands, where you can drink tap water. But if your question is how can we improve children's drinking water, this is one of the tools that seem quite successful. And of course, this is the end goal, at least if you ask me, and if you ask several people around me, they say the same. They want to live healthily, they want to live long, they also want to enjoy their life while living it. So one of the things that people need to do, and they really want to, is eat healthier. But then, of course, the question is, how can we achieve this goal? And one of the things can be these promotional activities that I have just discussed with you. So thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Frans. Really interesting stuff. And I love the expression on your daughter's face when she sees the treats. Brilliant photograph. I'm just, with time in mind, I think we'll ask some general questions. And I think one of those you could possibly start with anyway, which is about kind of modeling of food behaviors. So you've mentioned there the importance of, or how kind of exposure to those foods would influence reactivity to them. So again, with your daughter, she's seeing those foods and knows intrinsically that it's something desirable. And we heard that earlier in terms of kind of modeling eating fruits and veg in parents around children. So perhaps you could start with how important do you see this modeling of a healthy food environment in the home and externally and in our behaviours as being important in terms of creating a generation of children who eat healthy foods?
I think it's extremely important. As we see, is that of course you are a role model as a parent, so therefore they are, and if you say something, the children have to process it. And as Daniel Kahneman has shown, and many others as well, is that this system one thinking, this automatic processing of information, which is also modeling, is much more influential in this kind of behavior, because also they make these decisions automatically. So I think this is an extremely important part of showing, but also teaching, educating children at the same time, without even having to discuss it, that eating fruits and vegetables is extremely important. So as a parent, you have to give the right example, so to say.
Absolutely. We'll do our best. And perhaps we could go back to some of the speakers as well with the questions that we have as a more general Q&A. And perhaps I could come to you, Sam, if you could talk a little bit about good sources of information for mothers of young children, or indeed fathers. And there's a question about the information provided by First Steps Nutrition and how reliable you think that is.
Yes, I've just seen this question from Carolyn. Hi, Carolyn. This is a really interesting and somewhat political question. So we always tend to refer parents to the NHS advice, which is great, and it's evidence-based and easily interpreted by the audience that it's intended for. So here's where my personal values come in on this, is that, and again, it's personal values, is that you often see that industry have an influence on some of this. You've only to look at the characters used, you know, the foods that are promoted within there, despite, you know, there's regulations against it. So whilst it's accessible information for all and it's easily understood by all, I personally don't like the role that industry has in this. I don't, again, personal perspective, I don't always think that or very often at all, that industry acts in the best interests of the population's health. The ultimate endpoint goal for industry is to sell and to make profit. I don't think it's the ultimate goal of industry to make us more healthy. And then Carolyn has mentioned First Steps Nutrition, which is a wonderful independent public health advisory board. Absolutely love their work. They're very much independent from industry, which is nice. It's you know, easily accessible advice. I think we should be recommending First Steps Nutrition more, getting it out there to parents, you know, and moving away from a lot of what industry does. You know, there's a fake claim to want to improve people's health. Again, going back to the point that it's usually for sales. So yeah, whilst the NHS site has some useful, wonderful things, you know, there are things embedded in there that lead us back to products, you know, but on the other hand, I said earlier that there's a place for ready-made baby foods, there's a place for made pouches for those that, you know, don't have, you know, access to equipment, you know, that's necessary to make baby foods, you know, and again, on the other side of the argument, you know, we're very quick to demonize things like ready meals. They have the place for elderly populations that can't prepare their own food. Again, but, you know, I'd like to see a shift away from the industry message, if we can, regarding products and health, and promote things like First Steps Nutrition even more than what we do already.
Brilliant. So I'm just looking, so we have a few minutes left, so I'm conscious that I'd like to give the floor to Amelia to give us some sort of overview and concluding remarks about this session before we wrap up with some more information about next webinars. So if I could hand over to you, Amelia, for a few thoughts.
Thank you, Emma, and really a huge thank you to the speakers this morning, because I feel like I have learnt a wealth of information. So from thinking about preschoolers and weaning, and Samantha, I can really relate to that from my own lived experience of being splattered with rejected sweet potato. It's sweet, how can they not like it? Right through to, you know, Frans really challenging how I view the environment. So I do a lot of work around obesogenic environments, and I really liked that shift of focus to think about what the healthygenic environment, and maybe that's, you know, all with our positivity for 2021, we should be looking to promote the healthier environments. I think in terms of the speakers, you've offered such a breadth of areas in terms of the different types of food environment. So again, going to Brigitte's work around the food environment and children's media. And it's just today in the UK, today there's been a lot of commentary about the food that has been offered to children who usually receive free school meals. So in this country, as in other parts of Europe and globally, we have real issues with food insecurity, which is just completely mind-blowing. So as I've been looking at your presentations, at the back of my mind has been this lens of food inequalities, food insecurity, and how we are reinforcing, even in children's cartoons, it's reinforcing that message of buying the cheaper, the sweeter, the easier option, as opposed to the systems-wide change. We talk about systems, but systems even includes the film industry, and thinking about children's media environment as an actual environment in which we need to go and make differences. And I think, Sam, something you said was this whole issue of waste, and something all speakers have alluded to is that we cannot talk about fruit, vegetable diets without thinking about wider issues of sustainability. And that, I think those are the key themes that have come through, that we need to think about this wider systems approach. We need to think about this through the lens of inequalities and the fact that those with higher incomes are more likely to be able to access the fruit, the vegetables, and thinking about how we can make this message inclusive, and even thinking about it in the time of a pandemic where, you know, every 15 minutes, can I have a snack now? And the need to be creative. So maybe one of the outputs of this is we maybe need to produce a list of healthy snack ideas for people homeschooling. But I think a really informative session, and I feel really privileged to have been invited to listen, and I've enjoyed listening, and it has opened my mind and raised lots more questions and made me think about the books that I read with my 8-year-old and the focus of sweets in them as what the magic of sweets and how they're described, and why aren't we doing that with fruit and vegetables? And there's lots culturally going on. So yeah, lots of questions and lots of fantastic work, and well done for being so productive in light of everything that's been happening. You've got important work to do, and you've been doing a lot of fantastic stuff. I think I'll hand back over to you, Emma.
Thanks ever so much. I'll just quickly share slides just to finish off, because I wanted to point people towards the ECOG website, where you'll be able to access our e-modules and e-books prepared by experts on a variety of topics pertinent to obesity, prevention and treatment, and also to mention that there are going to be more webinars in this series. I know the next one is on the 4th of February about pharmacotherapy in adolescent obesity, so do sign up to those as well. And just a final thank you to our sponsors, Novo Nordisk, and to ECOG, and to all our speakers today and attendees. Thanks ever so much for joining us. And there we go. Thank you.